Welcome again, Professor Bhaskar. Thank you very much for making time.
Let us begin with your own career. You swam upstream when it was not fashionable. You went abroad, did your PhD, and came back to become a faculty member at IIT Madras. Can you describe the thought process that went into that aspect of your career?
So, when I was studying here at IIT Madras, actually, when I joined IIT, I had no idea what engineering was about or anything. Uh, some classmates in school told me I should write IIT entrance exam because I was studying well, and I wrote it and I came. I really had no idea. In fact, um my father had, as the fallback, had just arranged for me to ensure that I got admission into Loyola College for BSc. It was no plan. There was no plan that if I don't get into IIT, I'll go to NIT. There was not, because nobody. I mean, my dad also didn't seem to have much of a feel for what I should do. Anyway, I got into IIT and I didn't know what IIT was. It was 5 years, so I never thought about what next. Just went on with the flow. But here, the teachers were people who worried about you. Who Some of the teachers, they thought about what you should do and so on. Observed you. So some of my teachers put the idea into my head that I should actually study further and become an academic. I never thought of that. I didn't even know what it entailed. But they actually told me that I should try to go abroad to study uh, because the opportunities for higher studies in India at that time were much less, and they suggested this to me. But they also told me that I should aim to return. Not because already there were many people, large part of the class at that time in the late 70s and 80s was going abroad for to and remain, and it was already becoming clear to my teachers that they were all not coming back. So they told me I should do that, and I took that seriously for some reason. So when I went to the US to study, I had a very clear idea that I'm going to return. And in fact, they even suggested to me not to get into disciplines where it's impossible to come back or very difficult to come back, because the very minimum you require for an academic research and so on, equipment wise and lab wise, is not available here. So they said, you please, don't get into microelectronics and these things, because they also didn't have any vision that India would even advance to the extent it has. They assumed it would be pretty much what it was like in those days. And they said, look, go for things that are more analytical, more. And in that time, in the electrical engineering department, the high points were actually the classical area of networks and the fairly, at that time, hot area of electronics. But it turned out that they told me that one was obviously mature and reaching sunset, one area, and the electronics was pretty strong. But they told me even this will, by the time you get going, it will be very mature. Why don't you get into communications or things like that? That was their suggestion. I really didn't know much about, except what I was taught. So then I said, okay, so that's how I got into the study of signal processing and communication. There was one faculty member in the department at that time who was in these areas. So Professor Venkat Rao, he guided me to some extent. There were not too many courses being offered in these subjects, but project I did with him. And then I went to the US and studied these subjects. It turned out the advisor whom I worked under had switched. He was a person of wide capability. He had been in Bell Labs just before he joined the university, and he had moved from communications to, communications as in communicating between 2 points, to this emerging area where you try to compress audio and video signals, which is now, of course, we are all using all the time casually, MP3 and MPEG and all that. All this didn't exist, but the precursors of that. He had moved into that subject, and he told me, why don't you work in this for PhD? And I did so. It was, at those days, it was the beginnings of compute intensive approach to these things. And we worked on mainframes or mini computers. There were no desktops in those days. Apple had just come out of the Macintosh during my PhD. There were no desktops, and even that field seemed to me to be something where I would have a dead end if I came back to India, because I knew IIT had a computer, but it was a very different kind, and I couldn't see where it was heading. So I actually told my advisor at the end of my PhD that, look, I want to switch. I want to switch to wireless to communications.